And hello, welcome everyone. I'm Mark Pinto here at Phoenixville Public Library. And tonight we're pleased to welcome award-winning local author Lisa Kohn, who will speak about her memoir. In To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under the Influence, she reveals how one can leave behind absurdity and horror and create a life of intention and joy. Lisa Kohn is also the author of The Power of Thoughtful Leadership. She's a leadership consultant and executive coach and keynote speaker who works with leaders in Fortune 50 organizations and nonprofits, helping them become more thoughtful, present, intentional, and authentic in their leadership and their lives. Lisa, it's great to have you with us tonight to share your story.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. Nice to see everyone and meet everyone. And I said the phone would ring, and of course it did during you, and hopefully it won't again. I can't control the surroundings totally today. So I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for having me. So what I'll do, I'm going to read a bunch from my 5 pieces from my memoir, To the Moon and Back, and then tell my story throughout it. And then at the end, open it up for questions, as Mark had said. And so as y'all may know, the way I describe my childhood is the best seats I ever had at Madison Square Garden or at my mother's wedding. And if you're old enough, you know what that means. And if you don't, you will learn. And on the other hand, the best cocaine I ever had was from my father's friend, the judge. And someone once said to me, "Really a judge?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, really a judge of a small town in New Jersey outside of New York City." So that kind of gives you a quick glimpse of where I come from. My brother says that we were raised by wolves. I don't always agree with him, but I don't have a more accurate description of our upbringing. A friend of my dad's pointed out that wolves raise their young with more structure than our parents gave us. At first, I had no idea that anything was wrong with my childhood. Yeah, my dad was a hippie bartender who convinced my brother to smoke pot at the age of 10 and who offered to sell me to his friends for drugs. He was kidding. Yeah, I was running the household when I was 11, shopping, cooking, cleaning, because at that point, both my parents were gone. Yeah, my brother and I were left to fend for ourselves way more than you might say is optimal. And yeah, I grew up in a cult. My mom was a Moonie, and therefore so were my brother and I. For those who don't know what that means, the Moonies were members of the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, simply known as the Unification Church, the cult of all cults in the American age of cults. Church members gave their faith, lives, and worldly possessions to a self-proclaimed Messiah from South Korea. Some call it brainwashing. It was my life. I knew it was weird, but I didn't know it was bad. When it's all you know, it's all you know. You have no grasp that it could or should be different. I knew I could tell stories about my parents and people would laugh in disbelief, but I was oblivious to the fact that my stories covered up pain and emotional scars, and that much of what happened to me shouldn't have happened at all. I didn't realize I was harmed or that I was on a path of harming myself as I got older. I ended up in abusive relationships, anorexia, and mild drug addiction, to name a few things. But it didn't register that these were because I ached so much inside. I didn't know that my psyche was bruised or that I despised myself. As a kid, you misinterpret the nasty things that happen to and around you, and you somehow believe you're to blame. As a young adult, I internalized this more and more. As an older adult, I still can. I can get lost in darkness and desperation. I can feel unworthy or damaged or hopeless. I have my scars and insecurities, my fears that feel like they'll engulf me. I can be washed over with shame. But they're moments. As I said to my older child once when they struggled against their own demons, the waves of despair become less powerful and hit you less often. I've learned to face my terrors and to allow myself joy. It wasn't always an easy thing to do. I've learned that it's up to each of us to create the life we desire. We have the ability to lessen the influences around us that we don't want or don't agree with. When we can't lessen them, we have the ability to keep going despite them, even when we think we don't. So I'm a child of the 60s. My parents were hippies. My parents met in high school. Mom got pregnant, got married, had my brother when they were 19, had me when they were 20. They split up within about 3 years after that. We lived with my mom in East Orange, New Jersey, right outside of New York City. And my dad just kind of traveled the world at that point. And I was devastated, like most kids, by my parents' divorce. We literally lived in the basement apartment of a building, and my mom would go down the hallway to the laundry room, and I would stand in the doorway screaming, waiting for her, wanting her to come back. To this day, I wonder why she didn't bring me with her, but that's a whole different thing. So I'm terrified that my mom will leave. And life continues like this, and it's everything that hippie childhood is. There's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of nudity, my mom had abusive boyfriends, there's encounter groups, there's primal screaming. We got to see hair on stage. It goes like this on and on and on. And it's scary, it's instability, but it is what we know. And then when the summer between second and third grade, my mom bought a van for my father, Danny. To this day, I call my dad Danny. My mom is Mimi. My dad is Danny. To this day, my dad says I'm a person, not a label. Call me by my name. And so my mom, Mimi, bought the van for my dad, Danny, and we were going to drive across country to California to move on to a commune. But instead, my grandmother, my mom's mom, got sick, and we drove across the state of New Jersey to Millburn, New Jersey, and moved in with my grandparents. We lived there. My mom's mom, my grandmother, got sicker, and she passed. She died from the cancer, and we stayed. My mom taking care of the house for my grandfather, and we're living there. And then in the winter of 1974, in January of 1974, my mom's friend, with whom she used to hitchhike across country every summer, called her and said, "You have to go hear Reverend Sun Myung Moon speak." And my mom went to hear him in Princeton, New Jersey, and came back a changed person. This is amazing. He's amazing. Jesus wasn't supposed to die. This is incredible. But not a lot changed. And then that summer, one of the members, some of the Moonies, convinced my mom to go up to Barrytown, New York, where they had this huge indoctrination center for the weekend. And she went up for the weekend and came back and turned around and went up for a week and came back and turned around and went up for another week and came back. And basically she spent the summer at Barrytown. And then one weekend she took Robbie, my older brother, me, and she put us in the van and she drove us up. And we get to this huge building and we go inside into this big gymnasium, and all the sisters, all the women are sitting on the floor on the right side of the room, and all the men, all the brothers are sitting on the floor on the left side of the room. And within moments, Moon walks in with his interpreter and starts speaking. And that was it. We were in. He was my Messiah. And this is what it's like to have a Messiah, because it is a really cool feeling. Mimi, Robbie, and I spent a great deal of time at church centers that summer. As a family, we were hooked. We'd been loved bombed and wanted only to be surrounded by our brothers and sisters and live for God. Every weekend we weren't at Barrytown, the three of us would visit the center on East 71st Street in New York City for Sunday services, or Belvedere, a church estate in Tarrytown, New York, where Father, that's Reverend Sun Myung Moon, where Father would lecture on Sunday mornings at 6 a.m. We left Millburn before sunrise to get the best seats. I love the early morning, warmed by the feeling of closeness to God and the heat of the engine underneath me. Father spoke in an empty garage on the Belvedere property, standing on a small stage set in the front of the room with his interpreter at his side. There was a blackboard behind them in case Father wanted to explain his point further with illustration or to thump it with his fist for emphasis. Ornate chairs for true family were arranged to the left of the stage. Father spoke of God's need for us and of the glory and beauty that would be ours in the kingdom of heaven on earth. He warned us of the evils of the world, detailing how cunning Satan would be as he fought for our souls. He talked of the love that would develop between husbands and wives who are following him in God. He said their adoration for each other would be so great and selfless that they could and would sit next to each other on adjacent toilet seats while they used the bathroom with ease and joy. Just like the Love Toilet, a toilet for two parody from Saturday Night Live. But Father was not kidding. He instructed us to always work harder and sacrifice more, to accomplish greater and greater things for God. That became my new mantra: work harder, sacrifice more, accomplish greater and greater things for God and true parents. Brothers would crowd in, sitting cross-legged or on their heels on the hard, cold concrete floor on the left side of the building, right in front of Father. Sisters crushed in on the right. Mimi, whom I'd started to call Mother since joining the church, as it wasn't right or respectful to call her by her name, and I would grab spaces as far forward as we could on the sisters' side. Robbie squeezed in with the brothers. I didn't care if I was tired or if my legs started to go numb as I curled up on the floor, because I was with the Messiah. I was close to God. I can't begin to describe how intoxicating that feeling was, being around Father. Beyond special, beyond lucky, beyond chosen. Perhaps a combination of undeserving and graced. Not holy, but physically within inches of holiness. No wonder we removed our shoes when we entered a room where Father was or would be, and bowed to him as we came in or left. I would have done anything for Father, followed him anywhere. Every now and then, Father would ask new members to introduce themselves to him and to the crowd of family members. One Sunday morning, I did. I can't believe it now when I think of it. I was only 10 and incredibly shy, yet I had the guts to introduce myself to Father. Mother had moved to the back of the room to be with some friends, leaving me up near the stage without her. The sisters next to me rubbed my back and tickled my feet as we waited for Father to speak. I leaned into them in their love and felt a sense of contentment that was wonderful and becoming less and less foreign. When Father asked for introductions, I took a deep breath and stood and shook. I'm shaking. I'm talking to the Messiah. Of course I'm shaking. Father smiled upon seeing me, perhaps because I was young and little. I smiled back, unsure and aware of how unworthy I was to be standing in front of him. Feelings coursed through me. Gratitude that I could be blessed with knowing about the Messiah. Shame that I was so undeserving and tainted from my life before the church. And fear that I would somehow mess everything up, that I would let God down. I knew God wanted and needed more from me than I knew how to give. Through his interpreter, Father asked me my name. I'm not sure my reply was audible. How does one act around the Messiah? I was trying to figure that out. I knew I wasn't good or pure enough to talk with him. I felt and heard my voice quaver. I didn't want anything to quaver. I wanted to appear strong. I wanted to be strong. God and Father needed warriors to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. He asked who my spiritual mother was. Your spiritual parent is the person who brought you into the church. I replied that it was my own mother. We talked for a few more minutes. I can't remember about what, and I sat down, my heart pounding as if I'd sprinted a mile or more. It was good to feel the floor beneath me. I hoped I hadn't made too much of a fool of myself, that I hadn't said anything too stupid. What I try to explain to people is that because life was just a bit insane and unstable before the church, when we got there, it was like a haven for Robbie and I because there was structure. I like to say my mom stopped cursing. She stopped her no talking days, her silent days. She started wearing a bra. People loved us. It felt good. It felt really, really good. And so we just got more and more involved. And this is what happened. As if at warp speed, the church became the center of my universe, the sun around which I revolved and to which I clung for warmth and light. In retrospect, maybe there was a hole in my life that the church filled, or maybe it was the hole in Mother's life or psyche, and I took it on. Whatever the reason, I was consumed. Preaching and proselytizing for Father was paramount. Family members were the only people I wanted to be with. 71st Street, Belvedere, and Barrytown were the only places I wanted to be. There was no room for Danny. Whereas I barely visited him before the church, now I had no desire to see him. Even Robbie chose a church over Danny. All we cared about was our lives as Moonies. During our days at home in Milburn, we bided time in school and with friends who had mattered to us until we could get back to what mattered to us now. Mother especially immersed herself in this new world. At first, she was with us throughout the week, and things went on as usual, except for the fact that we now subscribed to a religion that was perceived by non-family members as bizarre. What do you believe? My friend Donna asked me. She's Catholic. Sarah doesn't get it. That's okay. Donna will love to hear about Father being the second coming of Jesus. Only I have to be careful not to actually say he's the Messiah. I'd try and explain. What, she'd ask again? That's weird. Are you sure? Whenever I shared our new affiliation, which I did as often as possible, and not just with Donna, but with everyone, since the whole idea was to bring the entire world to principle, my classmates stared at me intensely, or rolled their eyes, or told me I was crazy and strange. Adults were no more sympathetic. They questioned the church and were afraid of Father specifically and of Moonies in general. They compared Father to Hitler, to Mussolini, and to Charles Manson. They were petrified of being brainwashed or of having their children brainwashed. I knew that everyone outside the church was living for Satan and needed to be saved. With my unwavering conviction and dedication, I didn't notice as Mother headed into New York City a few days during the week to volunteer at 71st Street. At first, she was back in time to cook us dinner. Then she went in more and more, taking the first commuter train in the morning and coming home on the last train at night. We were left on our own to fix our meals as well as to get to school and put ourselves to bed. That was fine. Mother still came home to sleep, and it was for Father and for God. Then she started staying over some nights, and then more. Finally, in January 1975, at a rare time when Mother was around, and about 6 months after my first trip to Barrytown, she sat us down in the same flowered wing chair in the living room. That must have been our special serious conversation chair. It was a cold winter day. I snuggled up with her. "Sweetie," she began as she held us close. She paused for a long time. I sat there, feeling for her as best I could, wondering what was next. "Sweeties, I'm not sure how long I can keep this up, taking the 6 a.m. train out and not getting back till after 1. I know, Mother," I spit out. I needed her to know I didn't question her at all. "It's too hard. And I need to be there. I need to help. I'm being called to be there as much as I can." "I wondered what was taking you so long to figure that out," Robbie offered, his voice so subdued I almost couldn't hear him. Mother squeezed us tighter. "What should I do?" she asked. "What do you two think I should do?" "Go, Mother." My voice couldn't have been quieter, and I realized I sounded like I didn't want her to go. I didn't want her to go. That's how sinful I was. I didn't want her to go, but I couldn't sound that way. "Go, Mother," I tried again. "Go to where you have to be." "You're doing it for God," Robbie added. "We know you're doing it for God." After that, I suppose Robbie and I promised we'd be good and assured her that we'd be okay. I imagine we may have talked about logistics and school and Pop and how we get to visit her. I don't remember. Everything was a blur. I sat on her lap, willing myself not to cry and memorizing the feel of her next to me, the warmth of her body, her laughter, and her smile. It was God's will for her, and I wasn't going to stop her from doing what she needed to do, no matter what. I was prepared and eager to sacrifice and work for God in any way I could, even if it meant giving up my mother. So my mom left. She moved into New York City, ironically, to work with the International Family Association, which was the group for people who had kids and couldn't move into the church. And actually, my mom spent most of her years in the church raising other people's children. And to this day, I meet people and they say, "Oh, your mother took such good care of me." And I always say, "Yeah, I know." So she moved in and we lived with my grandfather, and I'm in 6th grade, Robbie's in 7th grade. And so my grandfather was a judge. And when my grandmother died, he got depressed and he stopped practicing his cases. And then when my mom left, he got more depressed and he really stopped practicing his cases. And then he got disbarred. And I am running the house. I'm shopping, I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, I'm excelling in school. I'm the star in the school play, but I'm taking care of everything. And my grandfather is extremely depressed. Apparently the police were doing a circle around the block on a suicide watch. And this goes on for a little while. And then my grandfather is called to go to court to possibly end up going to jail for all the cases that he stopped practicing and the way he let down his clients. And his doctor instead admits him to the local psychiatric ward, the hospital. And so Robbie and I get pulled out of school and we get shuffled around to a couple different places for a while. And somebody goes to get my mom, who's in Queens, I think at that point. And she says, "Not my problem." And she doesn't come back. And then eventually someone tells Danny what's going on, because when my mom left, somehow we knew not to tell anyone. So someone goes to tell Danny, and he came to get us and he pulls us out and he moves us into New York City, into that building where we grew up. I grew up on 2nd Avenue in the East Village of New York City. And this is what life with Danny was like. My life in the church and my life at home with Danny were irreconcilable. The austere values of my religion clashed with Danny's love affair with drugs. It was a love affair. Danny adored cocaine. "Blow is wonderful," he cooed. "A 1 and 1, one line of cocaine for each nostril, makes you feel like a new man. The only problem is, then the new man wants a 1 and 1." Some of Danny's friends were part of a drug smuggling ring, bringing back cocaine from South America. Danny dealt marijuana at times. I knew where his box of pot was kept, not hidden, but in plain sight and in easy reach on the shelf of the break front we moved from 9th Street. Danny and his friends snorted cocaine and smoked pot. Robbie now only watched, having stopped when we joined the church. Drugs were also the basis for a standing debate between Danny and one of his friends, Tony. The two of them argued over how much coke it would take for Tony to buy me away from Danny. Tony, I hope jokingly, wanted to take me home. How about half a gram, Tony would ask, looking over at me. Danny would shake his head no. 3/4? Again, a negative response. Okay, then, a full gram. Too little, Danny would laugh. Maybe next time. I'd watch Tony as he bargained with Danny, then feel his intense dark brown eyes on me staring, moving up and down. I could sense the heat rising in my face and longed to run from the room, but would stay somehow glued to where I was. Tony would smile and push his greasy black hair back from his forehead. Shivers would run up my spine and arms as I'd look away, curious how much coke it would take for Danny to say yes, and what would happen when he did. I always felt a confusing mix of relief and disappointment when the amount Tony offered was never quite enough. Danny's friend Jerry also gave me that weird feeling. He and his girlfriend Nicole had split, but I babysat for their daughter, Megan. Jerry made me squirm when he looked at me. When I was in high school, he outright propositioned me to join him and his new girlfriend in the bedroom. I babysat for Megan throughout high school, spending 3 nights with her every week, cooking her dinner, putting her to sleep, and passing out on Nicole's bed in the front room of their apartment until Nicole came home in the middle of the night or sometimes in the wee hours of the morning from her waitressing job. She would climb out of a cab and I'd climb in, or she'd have whatever friend gave her a ride take me the 7 blocks to my apartment. Sometimes I got home with just enough time to take a shower, dress, and head off to school. Megan was a sweet kid. Like Robbie and me, she was both enjoyed and tolerated by all the friends, until one night at Nicole's apartment when the drug of choice was again cocaine. The adults were squatted around the small coffee table in the front room doing lines. As the amount of cocaine laid out on the mirror dwindled, someone reached for the packet of coke lying on the table to spoon out more. Suddenly, Megan came bounding over and bumped into the hand holding the open packet of cocaine, spilling it. Everything exploded. Someone yanked Megan out of the way while everyone else dropped to the floor cursing, trying to scrape up whatever they could. I grabbed Megan and held her next to me on a chair across the room. So life continued like this. And what I try to explain is fervently, devoutly members of the Unification Church never actually lived there. So always lived with my dad from when we moved in with him, Monday through Friday with my dad in New York City in the East Village. But every weekend, every holiday, every vacation, anytime I could, every time we could, we'd be at the church with my mom. And then when my mom was in DC or upstate New York, just at any church center, it was our lives. And life continued like this. The summer between my sophomore and junior year, I was out in Seattle proselytizing, trying to bring in members. This is everything I wanted to do. And then the summer between junior and senior year, Danny sent me to music camp. And to this day, I'm convinced it was to keep me away from the church, again, because he hated it. I was always there and he would never spend money. All his money was spent on drugs and at that point, Baroque recorders. So he sends me to music camp. And for the first time, I become friends with people who the first time known to me were gay and or bisexual, which is a huge sin in my puritanical cult. So I write my mom and I say, what should I do? And she says, they're evil. You can convert them or just stay away from them. And again, for the first time, it doesn't make sense to me. And you have to understand, like a cult really works to control what you think, how you feel, what you do. And so we were literally taught that if we ever questioned anything, it was Satan inside us trying to win us back from Satan. So my mom says, convert them or stay away from them. I'm questioning it and I'm knowing that I am inhabited by Satan, terrified. I come back from music camp. And so I'm not only a member, but I happen to be best friends with Moon's children, with his second oldest daughter. So those are the true children. The Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon are our true parents and their children are the true children. They're as amazingly special and important as they can be. And then the huge mass weddings, those are called blessings. And when you are blessed in marriage by Moon, your original sin is removed. And so the children of these blessings are called blessed children, and they're born without original sin. So they are quite special too. And then there's sinful kids like me. So I'm friends with the true children. I'm friends with the blessed children. I come back home from music camp, and one of my friends, one of the blessed children, we're 16 at the time, she was seduced by our Sunday school teacher and is having an affair with him. And in order to keep all the notice away from her, she spreads rumors about me. She basically says, I want to sleep with all the men, sleep with all the brothers. And Moon hears these rumors, believes these rumors and makes a decree that only blessed children can play with the true children in order to keep me away. I like to say my Messiah banished me from his children. So I go to my senior year of high school knowing that Satan is in me, banished by the Messiah. So knowing that the Messiah knows Satan is in me. And I think, okay, you joined when you were 10, you were a child, you didn't actually make an adult decision, you just followed your mom. So now you're going to pull back a little bit, see life on the outside a little bit so that you can make a complete and full committed adult decision at the age of 17 to go in and never question again. And so my senior year, I start pulling back. I start staying home on the weekends and hanging out with Danny. I make new friends. I get more involved with friends. I am liking the friends. I'm liking the life I'm finding. I'm getting more confused. I experiment with alcohol. I throw a party for my best friend. I get drunk. I kiss a boy. I have a boyfriend. Really huge sin in my church. The fall of man is premarital sex. Lucifer, the angel, seduced Eve. Eve seduced Adam. This is the way one falls out of God. And we were also taught that God has been suffering for 6,000 years, and anything we do that is not in line with what we're taught to do will break God's heart. So I'm falling in love with a boy, knowing Satan's in me, knowing I'm breaking God's heart, tormented beyond belief. And I decide, go through the summer after high school, and I decide that I will go off to college. I'm going off to Cornell, and my boyfriend Adam is staying home in New York City at NYU. And I decide I will break up with him. I have to break up with him. I have to break up with him and go back. But I don't. And this is what happens. At Cornell, they joke about people committing suicide by jumping off the bridges. Someone had painted jumping zones and watching zones on the suspension bridge, and all the freshmen had heard a rumor that you were guaranteed an automatic 4.0 should your roommate jump. Before a stressful exam, Annie and I would teasingly suggest the option to each other in order to win a good grade. These days, they have nets under the bridges as a deterrent and safety measure. Then came the day that that option became real. I was heading back to the dorms for my job at a daycare center off campus. On my way home, I took the Stewart Avenue Bridge over Fall Creek Gorge. Halfway across the bridge that afternoon, I stopped and stood still, unable to continue. I gazed down the road toward where I was going and over the railing to the rocks below. I could hear water splashing and, if I listened for it, birds singing in the distance. I could feel the sun beating down. Frozen there, seeing but not seeing, hearing but not hearing, thoughts of plunging to the bottom of the gorge surged inside my head. I know it sounds cliched, but the minutes passed in a super slow motion, and I didn't think I could go on. Not the rest of the way across the bridge, and not with my life after the choices I had made. Each day was taking me further and further from the church and all I had known, believed, and loved. Self-condemnation and remorse simmered inside me like a newly active volcano about to erupt. Everything hurt too much and was way too hard, way too hard. I stared up at the sky, tears in my eyes, desperate to reconnect with the God I'd known through much of my childhood, longing for the sense of purpose and meaning that had sustained me for so long, begging for the all-consuming doubt and anguish within me to be lifted. High places are known to fill one with an urge to jump, to experience the sensation of falling, called high place phenomenon. But my feelings that day were different. It was almost as if I was empty, with a vacant pit inside me that echoed my torment and despair. I stood there with the gorge below and contemplated the fall. How long would it take? What would it be like? It was a beautiful autumn day. The sun was shining, the leaves were turning, and the air was crisp. I was in my freshman year of college with my future in front of me, but I had no desire to make it to the other side of the bridge. I couldn't choose a path for the rest of my life. I couldn't. Death was the easy, only, and best way out of the situation. If I was dead, I wouldn't be ashamed of failing and walking away from the Messiah and my responsibility. I wouldn't be another person who wasn't strong enough or good enough, who turned against God and killed God's heart. Or I wouldn't have to leave Adam. This would all be done. I stood on the bridge for 10 or 15 minutes, looking over the railing, studying the rocks with their jagged edges and the water calmly bubbling, thinking about the immediate release I would experience. I wanted to fall to my physical death to avoid falling, having sex outside of a blessed marriage, to my spiritual death. Eventually, I turned away and walked back to campus. Why? How? To this day, I don't know. Why did I return to my dorm and act as if nothing had happened? How did I find it in myself to do that? What got me through that moment? Was it what got me through everything leading up to that moment and what would hopefully get me through everything else yet to come? I have no idea. People ask me now how I made it through without cracking, without succumbing, without being far too damaged. Again, I just don't know. Maybe I didn't jump to my death that day because jumping would have been admitting defeat, and I was too stubborn for that. Maybe there was a part of me that loved life and that somehow saw some possibility and hope, or some chance for peace, even with my turmoil. Maybe there was a will in me to survive. Maybe I was protected by some greater power in the universe. Maybe I do have a steel rod for a spine. Maybe I'm just lucky. I may have decided not to throw myself over the bridge that day, but I still didn't know how to throw off the shackles of the church, how to lessen its influence and control of my mind and life. I didn't know how to make a final choice to leave, and I didn't know how to be anything but a Moonie. I didn't know what not being a Moonie meant. Open for questions.
Wow, that's amazing, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Janice.
I mean, it's so interesting. I did try to get your book and I didn't get it yet, but I definitely have to. I'm from North Jersey. I'm a lot older than you, but I knew a lot about the Moonies and everything. And it's just mind blowing because I have read other accounts of that time. And you're so brave to, you're a survivor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, but let me just ask you, what is the time frame on the book, the memoir itself? Like, is it like through present day did you write it, or?
So that's 1981, my freshman year, the freshman fall of, I had to think about that, freshman fall of college. It takes me through college, and right after college, I managed to get engaged to someone who worked for my dad. My dad owned a restaurant, a French restaurant. I got engaged to his chef, who drank a hell of a lot and was really mean. And someone pointed me the direction of Al-Anon, which is the beginning of my like, tell me if he's an alcoholic. There's no way I would ever be with an alcoholic when there's myriads of reasons why. So it takes me through that and walking out of that relationship to start anew. And then there's a bit of kind of learnings in between. And then it kind of flash forwards to 2008 or 9, when I actually started to go back to the church. And I actually, Injun is Moon's daughter, who I was friends with. I reconnected with Injun, and I kind of went back and embraced my past. When I first started to go into recovery, I had a group therapist who said to me, you have to integrate the church in order to heal. And I said, no blanking way. Like, the only way I'm alive is like this, right? But for me, I've had to go everywhere, see everything, find everyone, touch it, and make it real again, because it was just like 10 years it just was gone in my life. So it's mostly up until 86 or 7, and then a bit of the middle, and then a bit of now, which is now a long time ago, actually.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Talking about it for a reason, so I'm glad to do it.
It's curious. I went to Cornell from 80 to 82. I know that bridge that you're talking about. And actually, I met my husband there, and his roommate was a Moonie. He was from Australia. And he was in the master's program, and his actually came to rescue him from the cult.
Yeah.
And did you have any connection with other Moonies at Cornell?
So when I was there, CARP, which is the College Association for the Research of Principles, I think, which is the college group that would go to college campuses to proselytize and win members. They were there when I was there, but I kind of like walked past them like this in the straight, right, in Willard Straight Hall. Luckily, they didn't know me, versus my brother, who was at a small school. He was at Drew University, and there were people who knew him there. So they were there. I just stayed away from them. When I was there, also Steve Hassan came and spoke, you know, and he was a famous deprogrammer back then, and now he's big in the anti or cult survivor community. But yeah, he came and spoke. But so yeah, Cornell was big enough. Cornell was big enough that I could hide away from the Moonies, even the ones I knew who were there. And I was also big enough that I got really lost and desperate as I said something about Cornell, as my kids say, yeah, you're not the one to talk to about college. I'm like, no, I'm not the one to talk to about a college experience. It was not good. Yeah. Yeah. But that was personal. Yeah. So yeah, far above Cayuga's waters. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Could I ask you, if it's not too personal, like, what is your spiritual life like now these days?
It's not too personal. It's one of the less personal questions I'm asked. So I am very spiritual and not religious is the best way I can describe it. I used to, when I first left, I couldn't do anything. Like if I thought about God, I had to die. It was that quick because I abandoned the Messiah. When many people don't believe and leave. I believed when I left, so I was racked with the shame of it. And so the longest time it was like this, right? And now I am married. I have 2 kids. They were raised in the Jewish faith. I don't have respect for the way a lot of people, like this family does Judaism, because it's like cultural, and I don't understand cultural. It's a religion to me, but that's just my own thing. I'm very spiritual. My God is love. My God has a small g. My God's pronouns are they right now, because I kind of pull away from the more standard conservative patriarchal view of God. So I can be in any house of worship and feel connection to the universe, but I don't practice any religious doctrine. They're all a slippery slope to me. I mean, I'm an executive coach in my day job. I own an executive coach and a leadership consulting firm, and I work with a lot of clients who have a lot of scars from what they were taught in religion and about God, right? And so I believe in the essence of joy and love and beauty, and I call that God with a little g. But once you start getting into the rules, I just think a lot of people mess it up personally. Other questions?
How can people get your book?
There were 2 people were talking and I missed that. So
Go ahead, Janice, you go first.
Yeah, I want to know if your parents are still alive and what's your relationship with them today?
that's a very good question. So they are. Danny, so my parents had me when they were 20, right? So I am 57, I'll be 58 this year. So my parents are both 78, so they're quite young. As I say, because Danny had a stroke when he was 64, too much cocaine still, and he lost the left side of his body and his right eye. I ended up in an assisted living facility. I am his primary caregiver. And then because he's my dad, he smoked so many cigarettes and lit so many fires in his room that they had to move him to a nursing home. And once they moved him to the nursing home, they just put him in a wheelchair, never took him out. So now he's a very, very old, sad 78-year-old hippie. He was stuck in Princeton, New Jersey, but I moved him down. I live in Wayne, and I moved him down to Havertown. So he was 15 minutes away, and then COVID happened. So I've seen him 2 or 3 times in the last 3 weeks, and that's the first time in the year. And the first time I saw him, he's completely, as you can imagine, in a nursing home with no contact. And he's still a not nice word that begins with A to a lot of people, and he's really angry, and so they don't treat him well, and he doesn't treat them well. So he had no physical love or contact for a year, so he's very shut down. But he is he's there. I'm his primary caregiver. He's still one of the hardest people, and I have this big buffer, but he's mush inside. I know why he is the way he is. I know that he adores me. I just know he never, ever, ever, ever could say it or show it. And so I work with that. My mom, that's always a good one. My mom left the church when my oldest child was born in 1996. So if I left in the early 80s, my brother left in 84, my mom left in 96. She was in DC and she wasn't working for the church, but she was living with the church. And I had my baby and she came up to help, and she went back and she got fired. So she ended up coming up to the New York area to go to NYU to get a master's degree in early childhood special education, and lives in Millburn, New Jersey again, actually in the building where she lived when she was born. And we have an interesting relationship. So the thing about my parents is my dad could never say anything nice, really was whatever, and inappropriate, and just not like big rage. but took us in and took care of us. And my mom, I love you, I love you, I love you, and always left. Left us, put other people before us, chose everything before us. She was brainwashed, but she did. And so even for years after leaving the church, she would say things like, oh, I just talked to so-and-so who I used to take care of. They're so traumatized because their parents left them. And we'd be like, yeah, they are. And she just couldn't grasp it. And she'd read the book many times, but it wasn't until the book came out when she finally started to realize the impact of what she did, of her choices. But even still, you know, 2 Thanksgivings ago, because I didn't see her this Thanksgiving, of course, she said to me, well, I never felt like I left you because you're always in my heart. And I'm like, let's get this clear. You asked us to tell you to leave, and we never lived with you again. So she's been like that, but we've worked hard to have a relationship. I work hard to let her in, both of them, in my kids' lives, and to build a relationship with her. I hope she realizes that she was brainwashed and it is a cult. She's been out for decades, but doesn't quite see it that way, which still hurts. But we're really close. We just have this kind of like, you know, I am more than you. I'm actually at my in-laws, as I said earlier. My father-in-law is slowly dying, and that's why I'm here. And I watch like when you just love your parents and they're passing, it's a very different experience than when you have this very like love, but mixed with all this other stuff. But that's our history. So we've worked to build a family. It's just kind of a weird family with a lot of history, is the best way I know how to describe it. But I've worked hard. I have worked hard to heal, and to heal enough to have my parents in my life, but to keep myself safe when they're painful to me. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Is there still a Mooney church? Like, is there still that church and organization? How many
Yes.
people like belong to it at the height, and how many now? Or
that I can't give you because the numbers were never really real. What I can tell you is, what I used to say is that they live next door to you. You just don't know it. And that still may be true. They have many ways assimilated. They had this era of home church where everybody went back to the hometown and just lived there next to you and tried to win you over that way. Moon died, I should look it up, about 7 or 8 years ago. And when he died, the church, when he died, he was the richest religious leader ever. Billions, I think, like an incredible amount of money was his in the church, right? It's what it is, right? And literally, I learned this stuff long after coming out, and I'm like, whoa. But so all this money. So then, of course, there's these huge fights over control. And so now there's 3 factions. One faction is run by Hak Jahan, his former wife, and they keep changing the names. I think that's the Family Federation for World Peace, or the Women's Federation for World Peace. There's another faction that's run by 2 of his older sons. And the third faction, I'm pretty sure you've heard of, is called the Sanctuary Church. They're by his 2 youngest sons. They're the ones who are in Bucks County, and they're the ones who had AR-15s, the automatic rifles that they brought to a wedding ceremony. They were all over the news. And this one of the reasons I have 3 messages. The first message is that extremist situations exist. They are incredibly intoxicating. It is the best drug ever to believe in a Messiah, and they're very dangerous. So you have Sanctuary Church where people are armed and taught to fight, and trust me, they will fight when he says that. And show my political persuasion, they were at the Capitol. They stormed the Capitol. They're part of that group, right? So there's this right wing gonna fight. My other 2 messages, because they're important, I'll share them. For anyone who feels hopeless or damaged beyond repair, there is hope, and you're not damaged. I honestly realized that when the book came out, I still thought I was damaged. I have damage. There's a huge difference between having scars and being damaged material, right? And that's taking great healing to get there. And then the third, I'm an executive coach. I work with a lot of senior leaders. I work with a lot of people. And from my own experience, I do know that as a species, we're way too hard on ourselves. We're just judging and self-critical and so mean to ourselves. And we need a huge dose of self-love and self-compassion. And those are the 3 messages why I've added my brother and out here talking whatever I can about stuff. Because I like I say, I'm the executive coach who talks to C-suite leaders and Fortune 50 companies saying, put your hand on your heart, love yourself more. It's all about love. It's all about love. I was just doing today. So yeah. Other questions?
How did you heal from this, Lisa? And how did you get to be an executive coach?
Yeah. So heal is a present tense verb, healing. But yeah, so I crawled into Al-Anon. I got engaged to someone who drank a hell of a lot and was really mean. And someone pointed me there and I was like, tell me if it's an alcoholic, there's no way I would ever be with an alcoholic. Because I was so functional on the outside. I am such a recovering perfectionist, overachiever. I say I have a Mighty Mouse complex, but I'm here to save the day. So I can be broken inside and look really fine. And so it was then that I like crawl into Al-Anon to realize that one, there's alcoholism all over my dad's side of the family and addiction. And two, I grew up in a cult. And that's when I started. So it was a lot of 12-step program, a lot of therapy, a lot of trauma therapy. I've done eye movement, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing to really reprocess some of the crazy things I learned and interpreted when I was a kid. Mindfulness, I'm certified in positive psychology. I meditate, I pray to something, I do yoga. I have a lot of self-care practices. I follow Tara Brach, Rick Hansen. I just do my best to absorb positivity. I'm a coach, right? And I'll talk about that. I've learned, right? I know our brain is not a muscle. I know it's not a muscle, but I refer to it as a muscle, right? And how do I use it and pick it up? If our brains have evolved to be Teflon for the good and Velcro for the bad, how do I pick it up and go the other way and learn to find good? And how do I spent a lot of time, especially recently, being able to identify. I was literally taught lies. And my brain was literally controlled when I was young. You know, those of us born and raised are carved in very specific ways, but many of us have lies, right? That we were taught or that we had to interpret the world in order to survive. So to be able to be like, oh, that's a lie. I don't have to believe that anymore. I don't have to do that anymore. And this is my most favorite one. Literally, I said to my therapist the other day, so wait, people do or say or feel or think what they want, even if other people don't like that? People do that? And I'm still working, I'm 57, still working on that, right? Because my fear of your displeasure is tied into my fear of the Messiah's displeasure and God's displeasure, right? So to be able to pick that apart, but I am really healed and I'm really great. If I list everything that happened to me, you think I would be not, but I really am. But it's been a lot of work and a lot of love. I think love brought me into the church, and love has saved me and brought me out of the church and healed me from all of that. Executive coach, real quickly. I was working in entertainment advertising in New York City many decades ago, and somehow convinced a small division of a big agency, somehow convinced them to send me for an executive MBA at Columbia, and went and got my degree and fell in love with the disciplines in which I now play: organizational behavior, leadership development, people development. And left that job, went to work for a boss who, I think, I'm very short, you can't tell, but I used to be under 5 foot, now I'm probably under 4'10". And I used to look a lot younger than I was. And so I think he hired me because he thought he could push me around, but I worked for this boss and I was miserable. He was kind of pushing me around. I was working in not-for-profit. And I had a couple of professors who said, go ahead, be a consultant. I hung out a shingle when I was 3 months pregnant with my first kid to do consulting. And started so that's 95 that I started this company. Chatsworth Consulting Group is my company. I started doing leadership and I kind of apprenticed and learned it. And then in the late 90s, I was with a client and the CEO of this organization. I had just done a presentation on leadership or something. And she came up to me and she said, I want to be you. Do you coach? And I was like, yeah. Then I got certified as a coach in the late 90s. So I've been doing it since. And it literally, again, I'm the executive coach who talks about love. I take everything I learned, to heal, to recover, all the Al-Anon and AA sayings and everything. And I just offer it to my corporate clients. The good thing about the book is now I don't have to pretend. I can be very honest about where it comes from. I'm like, yeah, if you Google me, I grew up in a cult. Okay, so what? Now let's talk about you. So that's how I did. And I'm very lucky. I love to do what I did. I was talking to a new client today and we both ended up crying at the end of it, right? I can do really powerful work in a good way. I make my clients cry in a good way. So yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Other questions?
So how can people get your book, Lisa?
Well, they can get it at your library, Mark. But if you don't want to do that, if you want your own copy, it is available on Amazon. Absolutely. It is free on Kindle Unlimited. If you go on my website, which is Lisa Kohn, Kohn, Writes, WRITES, it'll give you a link to Main Point Books in Wayne. And I will walk up the street and I will sign it and autograph it to you, and you'll get it that way. And if you don't buy there, if you're not going to borrow from the library, I would rather you bought it at any indie bookstore, right? Or any person of color owned indie bookstore, because they're important. Our libraries are, and the indie bookstores are, but yeah, it's on Amazon and it's free on Kindle. But that's, yes. And that's all my social media. It's Lisa Kohn Writes, at Lisa Kohn Writes. And I love to hear from anybody about anything, especially formers, second gens, people who grew up, and anyone dealing with any sort of trauma, because I do know, I've heard it a lot of places recently, and I do know that those of us who have, first of all, I know that when you suffer any trauma, you have these two voices, one that says, oh my God, you're so damaged, and the other one that says, it wasn't that bad, everybody had it worse, right? They do that. But I also know that, and I, some young kid reached out to me with this long list of what was going on in their life. And I responded with love. And then I said, here's what I know. Those of us who suffered and make it through have more of an appreciation of life, simple things of life, simple joys, than those who haven't experienced it. So I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but know that when you get through, you will find more joy than other people might. So that's what I believe. So that's where you can find my book. I'm a consultant, so if you give me a question, I can answer it in a lot of different ways.
Anyone else for Lisa?
Any other questions?
I can say something as one of the second generation blessed children. I just want to say thank you for your book and your bravery and telling the story, and I can resonate with a lot of your experiences. Obviously, I'm a few years later than your experience, but thank you for being that voice.
That's why I do it. You know what, well, as my brother and I joke, this may make you laugh. There's a Facebook group for us, and we go on and we're like, oh, that's so-and-so's kid, and that's so-and-so's kid, but we try not to say that to anyone. But again, I did not know. First of all, I did not know we're called second gens. I did not know there was a community. You're gonna laugh. When I first found out, I was like, they're not gonna accept me because I'm not a BC. I'm not a blessed child. I'm sinful. Like all. But there's also the ICSA, the International Cultic Studies Association, which is a association just for cult survivors. And I went to a conference and I sat in a room of second gens, and somebody put out this list on the board of what it does to your brain. And I was like, oh my God, that's my brain. And I had never had a word for it. And I have gone to Scotland. I go to Scotland, and back when we could travel, and I, present with a Jehovah's Witness second gen, and these academics, and the academics will say something. And I look at this man he's a man, he's Scottish, he's JW, I'm a Moonie, and we're exactly the same inside. And I know everything he's thinking and everything he's feeling, and we are carved. It does really, maybe some good too, but it does really specific things to us. So thank you. That's why I do it, because yeah. So
More power to you, Lisa, for what you've been able to accomplish and overcome. And thank you for sharing your story with us tonight.
Thank you. Please, anyone get in touch. Miriam, get in touch. Who wants to? Thank you very much. Janice, good luck with your book.
Thank you.
Thanks for everyone for joining us tonight, and you'll be able to find the video of this program on the library's YouTube channel sometime next week, probably.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Everybody.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Good night.
And have